Welcome back to Haven's Cafe. Grab your overpriced designer coffee, grab a cup of tea, grab a bourbon if that's what you need. You may need something stronger these days, given the fact that the world is on fire. Today, we're going to discuss how did we get here. I often use this term, that we're living in an age of paradigm failure. Okay, so what does that mean? I think it's important for everybody to understand this. All right, so I'm going to discuss how we got here and where we're going as a world, as a civilization. Okay, so what's happening these days is that we're living through a catastrophic failure of paradigms. And paradigms are big, they're bigger than institutions. Okay, so a paradigm is something like capitalism or democracy, are big isms. Okay, so what happened was that, and I have to caveat this a little bit. All right, I'm speaking to you in English, and that means a lot of Americans are going to be watching this. And there's a thing that happens, which is that when we talk at this level, Americans really resist it. It's very hard for them to I don't know, kind of like think about the stuff that we're going to talk about with an open mind, rationally, sensibly. Now, it's not true in the rest of the world. Okay, America is a very special place like that, and we're going to get into it a little bit. So what happened was that over the last 20, 25 years, we had this paradigm. All right, and the paradigm was that capitalism and democracy would go hand in hand. Okay, and this was kind of what Francis Fukuyama very famously called the end of history. Okay, and the end of history sort of meant that, American capitalism would spread throughout the world, American-style capitalism, and it would transform everybody into democracies with it, and along with that would come a golden age of peace and prosperity. So this was an American theory, right? And you can sense the kind of hubris and American exceptionalism in it already, which is to say that our way is the best way. And if we just spread it around the world, well, everything will be fine. And you can kind of sense what was going to happen next, right? Which is that America began to spread this theory at the point of a gun, right? And that's kind of not the point, but I'll come back to it a little bit because it's important to discuss. But so this was the paradigm, okay? And this is how we kind of organized the world, all right? And the world was going to be organized this way, that America was going to be the world's biggest consumer, all right? China was going to be kind of its factory floor, and India was going to kind of like accompany it, okay? And Europe was kind of on the periphery of all this, and so was Canada, and the Asian nations were going to kind of join China in being, producers for this gigantic consumption, maw of consumption, huge mouth that America was to become, okay? So what happened next was that this paradigm began to break down catastrophically. So in America, and we've discussed this before, right? I showed you what I call is the most important chart of the 21st century, and what it shows is that incomes peaked in America as a share of GDP in 1970, and they've slid ever since. And now they're back down to Great Depression era levels, okay? So what this begins to tell us is that in America, capitalism failed, okay? And this is the part at which Americans tend to go a little bit nuts on me, all right? Because this, for some reason, they think this is some kind of political point. Listen, this is not a political point. The entire world agrees on this. Everybody agrees on this, except a number of Americans, okay? So capitalism failed in America, okay? And it began to create this dystopia that we see today. It devolved into this game of predatory capitalism first, right? Where the game was just to jack up profit margins at the expense of people's lives, okay? And then it imploded into this Trumpist wave of fascism that we see today. Now, the far right tends to call this paradigm, this system, globalism or globalization. And it's not really that, right? We've had plenty of global systems in the past before. We've had empires, we've had different kinds of trading arrangements, we've had colonialism, we had the League of Nations. I mean, plenty of attempts at global systems. What this really is the failure of capitalism as a paradigm around the world, okay? So, capitalism failed, and it imploded into fascism in America, okay? Now, the world is living in the aftermath of American collapse. And we see this violent, aggressive country lashing out in rage around the world, right? Starting trade wars, starting real wars, laying waste to the global systems that preceded this paradigm, right? So the post-war order, which preceded this paradigm, was about global systems of cooperation, okay? You know, all these bodies that kind of are in the background, right? Making our world really work, okay? Whether it's the UN or the IMF or the World Bank or whatever, right? And you can criticize them. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is just that we created them with the idea, with the hope that we were going to have a cooperative and peaceful world, okay? And then, starting in the 90s, America had this vision that we're going to create a world of capitalism, all right? So that paradigm has failed catastrophically. It's failed for America, and it's also failed for the world, okay? Now, let's talk about the countries that were the linchpins of this mess, okay? So what's weird is that they're eerie echoes of each other, okay? So in America, the middle class imploded, right? And now we have this sense of hopelessness and despair and frustration in America, right? Young people, think of the future as lost. People can't afford, housing, healthcare, all the basics. Same is true in China, okay? China is notable for its failure to develop a stable middle class. And that same sense of pessimism prevails there, okay? Their word for it is involution. In America, we could call it collapse. Same kind of sentiments, right? The future is hopeless. There's no more upward mobility. We have failed to develop a stable middle class and a path upwards in life for people, okay? So these are eerie echoes of each other. So this system has failed around the world, okay? Now, I don't want to get into sophomoric debates with Americans about capitalism is the greatest engine of wealth creation the world has ever known. No, actually, it's not, okay? If we want to speak objectively, social democracy is the world's greatest engine of wealth creation. And we can prove it with a very simple thought, right? Very simple set of facts. One human lifetime, Europe was ashes. It had nothing, okay? America had to reboot it with the Marshall Plan, invested a relatively small amount of money in Europe. One human lifetime, and Europe has created enough wealth to enjoy the highest living standards in human history. It's a fact, right? Europeans live longer, happier, right? More stable lives than Americans in every way. That's real wealth, okay? So capitalism is not the greatest engine by far. In one human lifetime to do that, a miraculous accomplishment, probably the greatest accomplishment in economic human history, okay? So this tired myth needs to be retired so we can understand the real stakes of paradigm failure. So these systems are imploding around us, okay? And what's curious about this, the reason that I highlight this, and I've been talking about Americans in this video, no, I don't mean every American, it's true. There are a lot of Americans, especially young people, who are very disillusioned with this, right? But by and large, America is a society that is sort of trapped. Way back when, and it was our good friend Karl Marx who invented this term, false consciousness. And he said that capitalism is going to create in people a false consciousness, where they really buy into this system, and they cannot envision anything else. And that's sort of what we see in America, right? It's very difficult for Americans to envision a different kind of society, which is why we get trapped in these foolish debates, right? If it's not capitalism, it must be communism. If it's not capitalism, it must be socialism. And socialism is evil. It's the devil. This kind of foolish nonsense. So paradigm failures. That's what a paradigm failure means, okay? Now, the question for us is, how badly is this paradigm going to continue failing? Well, let's think about the world now, okay? Paradigm failure is not abstract, okay? So let's trace the linkages now. In America, capitalism failed to provide a decent life for people. They grew angry, they grew upset, they grew bitter, they grew enraged, they grew hateful enough to elect a maniac like Donald Trump twice. Not every American, but right, we're talking on a social level here, okay? So I don't want to get wrapped up in this narcissistic objection of not every American. It's true, but we're talking about society, right? It's not about you as an individual. So elected Donald Trump twice, okay? Imploded into fascism. Fascism exploded outwards into this violence that we see now, where Trump is, right, attacking every basic functioning system that we have as a world. whether it's global trade, whether it's global finance, whether it's global peace, with actual wars, with trade wars, with all the stuff that he's been doing recklessly, alienating everybody, making an enemy out of everybody in the world. Okay? So trace those linkages with me, because those are the realities of paradigm failure. Okay? So now, if the old paradigm was predatory capitalism, American style, spreading around the world to bring democracy and peace with it, which obviously, right, sounds pretty ridiculous if you've studied history, and that failed. And the new paradigm now in America is kind of like authoritarian fascism and violence and conflict. Well, that paradigm it's even worse than the last one, right? So where does that leave us as a civilization? Well, it leaves us in a system, in a situation of breakdown. So this is why I talk about paradigm breakdown, right? And every time that we try and reinvent a paradigm that will work, we can't do it, all right? And we can't do it because the people in power are so wedded to these old failed paradigms that they won't let any forward motion happen. And this is what is called inertia in organizational thinking, all right? So what I mean by that is, there's an early part of my career where I was working very hard on reinventing the economy. How do we think about it? How do we conceptualize it? How do we measure it? It shouldn't just be GDP, right? It should be something more than that. Now, if we had done that, maybe we would have seen that the system wasn't working, it was failing people. And we could have invested to address some of this failure and prevented this rage and violence from spilling over into Trump being elected twice. Okay, so simple forms of paradigm reinvention. In a other video, we talked about our civilization failing to make an energy transition, and that's why we're now at the mercy of this energy shock, right? So another breakdown, another failure. So every time that we try and push forward towards new paradigms, we are blocked by systems of power that want to cling to the status quo because the status quo benefits them, right? And we've seen that in the revelations about the Epstein class, right? And it's very naked and it's very open there that, right, power is only interested in preserving its own privileges, no matter how psychotic and abusive they are, right? We're going to kidnap girls and take them to an island and rape them, right? It's not interested in actually reinventing any of these old paradigms. It's happy to benefit from the ashes, from the failures of our broken paradigms. So that leaves us in a very bad place as a civilization, okay? It leaves us in a vacuum, in a void. And that is why we're beginning to experience regress as a civilization. And I'm not making that up. This is statistically true, right? On every dimension that we think about civilizationally. Politically, democracy is eroding. Economically, the world is disintegrating. Financially, right, wealth is beginning to go up in smoke, all right? In terms of peace and justice, you can see conflict erupting everywhere. In every dimension that we can think of now, human progress is going into reverse. And this again, the statistical fact, right? Every broad measure that we have of human progress flatlined around 2020, and now it's falling, okay? So the stakes of paradigm failure are super real this way, all right? And the fact that we're in this vacuum and this void where it's not just that we don't have new paradigms, we're not even able to talk about new paradigms because even doing that is very threatening to the status quo, right? Immediately you start talking about something, people get very upset. Oh, there's utopian thinking, or we can never do that. Or, well, then what's the alternative, huh? We live in the ashes of these broken systems forever, right? Or worse, we go further towards dystopia, right? Which is what kind of like the techno barons and the techno dorks want. All right, so this question goes deep. So this video is getting very long. I just wanted to have a little discussion with you guys about this idea of paradigm breakdown and paradigm failure. All right, and the fact that we're in a vacuum, we're lost as a civilization right now, and we need to find our way out of the woods, guys. All right, I hope that helps. Comments, questions, leave them below. Thank you for listening.